The morning they cut my power, it was 12 below zero, and the wind was hitting hard enough to make the walls of my camper groan like an old ship at sea. I remember waking up because something felt wrong. At first I couldn't place it, then I realized what was missing. The heater. That soft humming sound I'd heard every winter night for years was gone. A few seconds later, the cold hit me. Not normal cold either. The kind that reaches through blankets, through clothes, straight into your bones. I threw on my boots, grabbed my coat, and stepped outside. That's when I saw it. My electrometer was gone. Just gone. In its place was a bright red tag hanging from the conduit. I stood there staring at it while snow blew across the frozen ground. For a second, I honestly thought somebody had made a mistake. Turns out they hadn't. My name is Mason Reed. I'm 38 years old, licensed electrician, born and raised outside Sheridan, Wyoming. My grandfather bought our property back in 1961 when this whole area was nothing but cattle land and dirt roads. 40 acres of rough country, sagebrush, old pine trees, and enough open sky to remind you how small you really are. I wasn't living in a mansion. Actually, that's part of the problem. While I was building my house debt-free, I was staying in a fifth-wheel camper parked on my own land. Nothing fancy. It was warm, functional, and paid for. The people around me had different ideas about what a neighborhood should look like. About 10 years earlier, developers bought up the surrounding ranch land and built a luxury subdivision called Aspen Ridge Estates. You know the type. Stone entrance signs, decorative fences, perfect lawns, homes that looked like they came straight out of architecture magazines. The average garage in that neighborhood was probably bigger than my entire camper. And for some reason, my existence bothered them. Or more specifically, it bothered one person. Her name was Victoria Hale, president of the Homeowners Association. Mid-50s, always dressed perfectly, always smiling, the kind of smile that never quite reaches the eyes. Victoria had a favorite phrase, protecting community standards. She used it the way some people use punctuation. Protecting community standards. Protecting community standards. Protecting community standards. Usually right before making somebody's life harder. For years I'd received little notices. A trailer visible from the road. Equipment stored outside. Construction materials not screened properly. Most of it was annoying, but manageable. Then something changed. About 6 months before the power incident, the HOA expanded what they called their community influence zone. Fancy language. What it really meant was they suddenly started acting like they had authority over properties that had existed long before their subdivision ever showed up, including mine. I pushed back. They pushed harder. Every conversation became an argument. Every letter became a threat. And eventually it stopped feeling like code enforcement. It started feeling personal. Standing in the snow that morning, I pulled the red notice off the conduit and read it twice. Violation of seasonal appearance standards. Temporary dwelling enforcement. $900 fine. Removal required within 14 days. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was insane. The temperature outside could freeze exposed skin in minutes, and somebody had decided my camper was hurting neighborhood aesthetics. I called the number listed on the notice. Victoria answered on the second ring. Mason, she said calmly. I was expecting your call. Of course she was. You pull my power? We enforced a compliance action. During a cold snap? We've received multiple complaints. I looked out across the snow-covered fields. Funny thing was, none of my actual neighbors had ever complained. The complaints always seemed to originate from people living behind Aspen Ridge's gates. The pipes in this camper are going to freeze. I'm sorry you feel that way. I remember gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I'm sorry I feel that way. We all make choices, Mason. Community standards apply equally. Then she hung up. Just like that. No discussion. No compromise. No concern. By noon, my water lines had frozen. By evening, one of them burst. I spent the next several hours hauling heaters, draining pipes, and calculating damage I couldn't afford. About $2,500. Maybe more. That night, I sat alone at my workbench inside my metal shop building. The wind rattled the walls. The coffee had gone cold. And for the first time, I seriously considered whether Victoria's goal had been exactly this. Not compliance, Not rules. Not appearances. Maybe she simply wanted me gone. Maybe the camper was never the problem. Maybe I was. Around midnight, I started digging through old property records, looking for anything that could help me fight back. Tax maps, surveys, utility documents. Most of it was boring paperwork nobody had looked at in decades. Then I found a yellow folder covered in dust. Handwritten across the front were 4 words. North Valley Utility Easement. I almost put it aside. Almost. If I had, everything that happened afterward would have never happened. I opened that old folder expecting more forgotten paperwork, the kind of stuff families keep for 50 years and nobody ever reads. Instead, I found the document that would turn my entire situation upside down. Inside was a survey map dated 1963. Folded behind, it was a stack of engineering sketches. Then there was a handwritten note from my grandfather. His handwriting looked exactly the way I remembered it from old birthday cards and Christmas notes, shaky but deliberate. I sat down and started reading. The deeper I went, the stranger it got. Back in the early 60s, long before Aspen Ridge Estates existed, before most of the county roads were paved, the area had a serious problem. There was no natural gas service out there. The nearest supply connection sat several miles east. Most people heated with propane, wood, or whatever they could afford. Apparently, my grandfather got tired of hauling fuel every winter and paid for a private gas line installation himself. Not a small line, a major line, miles of it. The engineering map showed a buried pipeline stretching across land that would eventually become the entire Aspen Ridge subdivision. My first thought was simple. Interesting piece of family history. Then I noticed something. The line wasn't marked abandoned. It wasn't marked transferred either. No utility company logos. No municipal ownership records. Nothing. Just one name. My grandfather's. I spent the next hour digging through every page. The more I read, the more confused I became. Surely somebody had purchased it eventually. Surely some utility company had taken over. Surely there was paperwork somewhere. There wasn't. The next morning, I called an old friend named Ryan Keller. Ryan wasn't one of those flashy attorneys who advertise on billboards. He was the kind of lawyer who actually enjoyed reading property records, which honestly made him dangerous. I emailed everything over. He called me back 3 days later. The second I heard his voice, I knew something was different. Mason. Yeah. You're sitting down? I laughed. Should I be? Probably. That got my attention. Ryan spent the next 10 minutes explaining what he'd found. County records, historical easements, title transfers, infrastructure filings, everything. Or more accurately, the lack of everything. No transfer agreement existed. No municipal adquisición. No utility company purchase. No recorded conveyance. No dedicación. Nothing. Legally speaking, the gas pipelines still belonged to the original property. My property. I sat there staring at the wall. You're telling me Aspen Ridge is running on my family's gas line? Ryan paused. That's exactly what I'm telling you. I honestly thought he was joking. Then he dropped the next bomb. There should be a master control valve. A what? A shutoff. My stomach tightened. Where? Ryan cleared his throat. According to the original engineering survey on your land. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he added one final sentence. Mason, you need to be very careful with what you do next. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was planning revenge. Because suddenly everything looked different. For years, I'd been treated like the outsider. The inconvenience. The guy in a camper. The guy who didn't fit the image. Yet underneath every luxury home in Aspen Ridge ran infrastructure connected to land they'd spent years trying to control. The irony was almost funny. Almost. The next morning, I grabbed a shovel and headed toward the old well field near the western edge of my property. The engineering map was surprisingly accurate. After clearing snow away from a concrete box half buried in frozen ground, I found it. A utility vault. Exactly where the survey said it would be. I lifted the lid, and there it was. A heavy industrial gas valve. Old, weathered, but very real. I stared at it for a long time. Longer than I care to admit. Because here's the truth nobody likes talking about. Power changes people. Not electrical power. Real power. The kind that suddenly appears when you've spent years feeling powerless. I wish I could tell you noble thoughts immediately filled my head. They didn't. I thought about frozen pipes, the repair bill, the notices, the phone calls, the smug smile Victoria always wore during HOA meetings. I thought about being treated like some temporary problem that needed correcting. And I thought about the valve and the neighborhood attached to it. 43 homes, every furnace, every water heater, every gas fireplace. Connected. One turn away. I closed the vault and walked back to my shop. For most of the day, I wrestled with it. Part of me wanted to ignore everything. Another part wanted to hire lawyers and start a formal dispute. The problem was time. Legal battles move slowly. Winter doesn't. By evening, another snowstorm rolled in. The forecast predicted temperatures dropping even further overnight. I looked at the invoice for my pipe repairs sitting on the desk. $2,417. I looked at the violation notice beside it. $900. Then I looked at a photograph hanging above my workbench. My grandfather standing next to the original property fence sometime around 1970. The man who built things, protected things, fought for things. And I found myself wondering what he'd do. The answer came faster than I expected. At sunrise the following morning, I walked back to the utility vault. Snow crunched beneath my boots. The air felt sharp enough to cut skin. The whole valley was silent. I opened the concrete lid, reached down, wrapped both hands around the valve wheel, and turned it. Not fast, not dramatically, just enough. A controlled reduction. Then I closed the lid and headed home. For about 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then my phone started ringing. The first call came from a neighbor I barely knew. "Hey, Mason, you having gas pressure issues?" I told him I wasn't. 10 minutes later, another call came in. Then another. Then 3 text messages. Then 7. Around noon, Victoria called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "Mason." She sounded different. Tighter. Less confident. "What can I do for you?" I asked. "We're experiencing a utility interruption." I looked out the window. Interesting choice of words. "That's unfortunate." Silence. Then she continued. "Several residents have reported heating problems." I see. Another pause. "Mason, do you know anything about this?" I let that question hang in the air. Long enough. Then I answered. "According to county records, that's privately owned infrastructure." The silence that followed was beautiful. Not because I enjoyed it. Because for the first time since this whole mess started, she didn't have an immediate response. No prepared speech. No community standards. No policy language. Just silence. By late afternoon, things were getting ugly inside Aspen Ridge. People were posting online. Families were scrambling for portable heaters. A few residents booked hotel rooms. One local hardware store completely sold out of emergency heating equipment. The panic wasn't because homes had gone completely cold yet. It was because people suddenly realized they might. And fear grows fast when temperatures drop below zero. Around 6 that evening, I sat down with Ryan and drafted letters. 43 of them. Every household. Every property owner. The terms were straightforward. Formal utility lease agreement. Shared maintenance responsibility. Full reimbursement for damages caused by the wrongful power termination. Permanent withdrawal of all camper-related enforcement actions. Recognition of my property's independent status. Everything documented. Everything legal. Everything transparent. By the time the letters went out, the sun had disappeared behind the mountains. The temperature was dropping fast. And for the first time in years, the balance of power had shifted. I just didn't realize yet how quickly the entire HOA was about to start falling apart. The next morning, the valley looked completely different. Not physically. The snow was still there. The mountains were still there. Aspen Ridge still looked like the cover of a luxury real estate magazine. But the atmosphere had changed. Fear has a way of stripping away appearances. By 8 o'clock, my phone had already collected more missed calls than I'd received in the previous 6 months combined. People who had never waved. People who had never spoken to me. People who had driven past my camper for years pretending I didn't exist. Now suddenly they knew my number. Around 9 that morning, a man named Ethan showed up at my door. He lived 3 streets inside the subdivision. Nice enough guy. Software engineer. Always seemed busy, always polite, but distant. That morning he looked exhausted. He stood on my porch with a heavy winter coat thrown over pajama pants. My kids didn't sleep much, he said. The house dropped into the 50s overnight. I nodded. He looked uncomfortable. Not angry, just caught in the middle. Look, he said quietly, I don't know everything that's happened between you and the HOA, but people are talking. I laughed. I imagine they are. His eyes drifted toward the snow-covered field behind my property. Is there any way this gets fixed? That question stuck with me. Because Ethan wasn't Victoria. Most of the families weren't. They weren't the ones sending violation notices. They weren't the ones cutting power in sub-zero weather. They were simply living inside a system they assumed was being managed correctly. And that realization mattered. By noon, the situation escalated. A local fire department crew entered the subdivision after an elderly couple attempted to supplement heat with an indoor propane unit. Thankfully, nothing catastrophic happened, but carbon monoxide alarms forced an emergency response. That was the moment things began unraveling for the HOA. A fire captain started asking questions. Simple questions. Who owns the gas infrastructure? Who maintains it? Where are the inspection records? Where are the utility permits? Where is the maintenance documentation? Apparently nobody on the board had answers, or at least not good ones. That afternoon, Aspen Ridge held an emergency homeowners meeting. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. Residents recorded portions of it, and the clips spread quickly through neighborhood group chats. It was chaos. People were angry, not just about the heat, about trust. For years, homeowners had paid dues believing certain things were true. Now, they were discovering those assumptions weren't supported by actual documentation. One board member resigned during the meeting. Another followed shortly afterward. Victoria tried maintaining control, but the room had already turned. Once confidence breaks, authority usually follows. Around 7 that evening, my phone rang again. Victoria. This time she skipped the formalities. What are your terms? No speech. No threats. No lectures. Just business. I looked down at the repair invoice still sitting on my desk. Then I looked out the window toward the lights of Aspen Ridge glowing faintly across the frozen valley. The terms are in the letters. You know, this is putting families at risk. The accusation hung there. For a moment, I almost responded emotionally. Almost. Instead, I said something I'd spent 2 days thinking about. No, Victoria. Cutting someone's electricity during a Wyoming cold snap put families at risk. Silence. Then a long exhale. For the first time, she sounded tired. Not defeated, just tired. Because somewhere deep down, she probably knew the truth. This had stopped being about a camper a long time ago. It had become a contest of authority. And contests like that rarely end well for anyone. Negotiations continued through the evening. Lawyers got involved. Documents moved back and forth. Language was revised. Clauses were added. Responsibilities clarified. By 10 o'clock, the framework was complete. Formal lease agreements, infrastructure oversight procedures, maintenance schedules, insurance requirements, damage reimbursement, permanent withdrawal of all enforcement actions related to my temporary residence during construction. Everything documented. Everything transparent. Exactly the way it should have been from the beginning. Then came the signatures. One by one, they started arriving. Email notifications filled my inbox. Homeowner after homeowner signed. Families weren't interested in politics anymore. They wanted certainty, heat, stability. By 11:38, 42 households had completed the agreement. One remained. The final signature arrived at 11:51, 9 minutes before midnight. I stared at the screen for several seconds. 43 signed agreements. A reimbursement transfer already processing. Board restructuring provisions accepted. The dispute was over, at least officially. I pulled on my boots and headed outside. The temperature had fallen below 15 degrees under zero. The wind had settled, leaving an eerie silence across the valley. The kind of silence you only hear during extreme winter nights. I carried a flashlight across the snow until I reached the utility vault. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at it, thinking. Because nobody really talks about what power does to people. Not when they gain it unexpectedly. Not when they finally have the leverage they've dreamed about. The truth is, once you discover you can make someone uncomfortable, it's easy to keep going. It's easy to justify, easy to convince yourself they deserve it. That thought bothered me. More than the HOA, more than Victoria, more than any violation notice. Because somewhere along the way I'd realized something important. If I enjoyed this too much, I'd become exactly what I'd spent years fighting. I opened the vault, placed my hands on the valve, and slowly turned it back. Metal groaned softly in the darkness. Then I waited. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then somewhere in the distance, a furnace ignited. A faint whoosh carried across the frozen air. Then another, and another. Soon dozens of heating systems were coming back to life throughout Aspen Ridge. One after another, like dominoes falling in reverse. I climbed out of the vault and looked across the subdivision. Within minutes, thin white plumes began rising from rooftops throughout the neighborhood. 43 homes, 43 families. Heat returning. The sight wasn't satisfying in the way people might expect. It wasn't victory. It wasn't revenge. Honestly, it felt more like relief. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "We're warming up. Thank you." Then another from a different homeowner. Then another. The final message came several minutes later. Victoria. Just 6 words. Service restored. Board transition effective immediately. No apology. No argument. No excuses. Just an ending. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and started walking home through the snow. 6 months later, Victoria sold her house and moved away. A new board took over. Attorneys reviewed governing documents. Infrastructure ownership was clarified. Insurance policies were updated. Everything became documented, inspected, and transparent. And honestly, that's probably the best outcome anyone could have hoped for. These days, my house is finished. The camper is gone. The neighborhood is quieter. Not friendlier exactly, just healthier. People understand boundaries better. They understand ownership better. And maybe most importantly, they understand that assumptions aren't the same thing as facts. Looking back, I still think about that winter sometimes. About the power outage. About the valve. About how quickly people can confuse authority with ownership. But I also think about something else. I think about how close I came to pushing things too far. Because leverage is dangerous. Even when you're the good guy. Maybe especially then. So now I want to hear from you. If someone used rules and authority to make your life miserable, what would you have done? Would you have fought back the same way? Would you have negotiated first? Or do you think I crossed a line the moment I touched that valve? And if you're serving on an HOA board, a city council, or any position of authority, how do you make sure protecting the rules doesn't slowly become controlling people? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where you stand on this one, because even after everything that happened, I'm still not sure everyone will agree on who was right.